What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. Today I'll be going over the running backs I'd be trading for and away this week. I'm testing out a new setup, but as always, just let me know what you think in the comment section below, and make sure to hit the like button if you did enjoy the video. So, we'll get into the running backs in a second, but first, of course, have to start things off as usual. Stat of the day. Yesterday's stat was what wide receiver scored the most half PPR points last week without scoring a touchdown. The answer is Deontay Johnson. Joe Haynes was the first to get that right on YouTube, and at Josh Algren was the first to get that right on Twitter. Today's stat. Randy Moss and Jamar Chase have the most PPR points over wide receivers' first 6 games of their career, but who ranks third? All right, so I want to start off by talking about the running back position as a whole. We've got McCaffrey, Barkley, Chubb, Gibson, Hunt, Montgomery, Clyde, Carson. All of these running backs are either on the IR currently or are going to miss some time. And that's not including, the guys who are done for the year or have missed time to date. Running backs have just been decimated so far this season, and we're only in week 7, right, of an 18-week season. So considering the position was already, weak to start the season, trading for running backs is brutal. Let's just be honest. And trading them away needs to be done very carefully because there are only so many that are even getting us points every week. Because of that, the trades that I recommend are highly dependent on your team. Are you 6-0? Having largely avoided injuries, maybe gotten a little lucky as far as that's concerned, or perhaps you hit on a few late round picks that have really broken out this season, maybe some really great free agency ads, or are you 2-4, but maybe you're still like a top 3 scoring team, you have a strong team, you're just getting unlucky with matchups. Are you 1-5, you've been wrecked by injuries, your team's not performing the way you'd like it to, and you just basically need a blockbuster trade to shake things up. Again, what I recommend will largely be dependent on the answer to those. What is the state of your team? So having just like a generic list for everyone, I don't think is the best way to do it. So here's what I'm going to do this week. I'll briefly touch on the running backs to sell high on, just understanding that any healthy running back getting volume is still valuable. So under no circumstance you're just giving running backs away. And then I want to give you guys some trade targets for specific types of teams and have like a more general discussion over the direction you should be taking depending on your record, depending on the strength of your team. I know I've said this before, but it's very important to know that like trades don't just happen in a vacuum, right? Me and you could have the exact same team, but if the McCaffrey owner in your league is 0-6, but in my league he's 6-0, well, then we have a completely different outlook on trading for him, right? I have basically no shot because that owner is 6-0 and it's going to be impossible for me to acquire them. But in your league, if McCaffrey owner is 0-6, well, that's going to change things up, right? So understand, please, that trades are very, very league specific, and you need to understand your the position that your trade partner's team is in before ever even considering sending them a trade. But with that being said, let's touch briefly on the sell highs, and then we'll go over what we should be doing given different records for possible teams. Last week, we talked about Damian Harris, Antonio Gibson, and Kareem Hunt as sell highs. Obviously, Gibson hurt, Hunt hurt. You're not really selling high on these guys anymore. Their value definitely took a hit. You're probably just going to have to hold on to them at this point. And you guys probably don't want my Harris take for like the millionth week in a row. I continue to believe that he's a sell high because he lacks weekly upside. He needs to absolutely go off even where we're starting, and just this future competition with Stevenson. A few new names this week are James Conner, Mike Davis, Melvin Gordon, and David Montgomery. The only name on that list that should give you any sort of real surprise is David Montgomery. But if you did watch, the rest of season rankings video yesterday, then you know why. I think Khalil Herbert is like a legit NFL talent. He has broken out this season. He looks like he's going to be very good, and he looks like he's there to stay, right? I don't think he's just going to go away once Williams comes back, once Dave Montgomery comes back. And so if that's the case, then I'm expecting like a full-blown committee, and it's a committee on the Bears, and that's an absolute nightmare. Low volume team, a team that, like, it's fine to be on a low volume team, kind of like the Packers, right? Because they're so efficient, right? The Packers are going to score touchdowns, going to move the ball downfield. I don't really care too much if they're in lower volume games because their subs can still go off. But the Bears are not overly efficient. The Bears are not, top of the league in touchdowns per game, and so when they're at low volume, that really hurts. And if you're then forcing your running backs into a committee, that's going to hurt everyone. So like I said yesterday, Herbert's stock is up, but his stock is still not going to be as high as it can be when Montgomery comes back, and then Montgomery's going to take a big hit. And so if you're in a league where there's a team that's doing really well, and they're kind of looking for a trade the running back, kind of like we're going to talk about in a second what we're doing when we have teams that are doing really well. But if there's a team in your league that kind of fits that category, they're like 5-1, they're 6-0, and they're looking long term, you might be able to talk to them and be like, hey, Montgomery was clearly the guy, when he was starting the season. When he comes back, he's going to be the guy again. You don't need to win right now. You need to win in the future. I think I should trade you Montgomery for someone now. And you might be able to get a deal done or something like that, even though I now think Montgomery's not going to be overly valuable when it comes back. So we can kind of talk our opponents into believing that the trade is really good for their future, even though, let's be honest, we don't think it might be because of the emergence of Herbert. So, on to the trade targets though. This is where I think the most value is in changing up the style of this video. Again, if you want the old style, I can go back to it, but please let me know what you prefer. So let's start with scenario 1. Let's say you are either 6-0, you're 5-1, and you're feeling good, right? If you're 6-0, 5-1, you should probably be towards the top of the league in points scored. There could be a scenario where you got really lucky. You're 6-0, 5-1, but like, let's say in a 12-team league, you're like 6th in points scored. I would probably bump you down to scenario 2 because your team actually isn't as dominant as it might seem. Maybe you're getting a little lucky, but for the most part, if you haven't lost yet, you've lost one game, your team is probably very, very good, so we're putting you in scenario 1. That means that your trade targets are all longer term. And by that I mean you shouldn't be too concerned with a player's outlook over the next 2 to 3 weeks. You should be looking more at the next 2 to 3 months, right? And 3 months, that's like an exaggeration, but like, you know what I mean. Like, you should not be looking at what's their matchup next week, the week after that. You should be like, okay, come weeks 12, 13, 14, 15, where do I think this player is going to be valued? What are their matchups at that point? What is their value going to be in the fantasy playoffs, right? With 5 or 6 wins right now, you'd have to perform pretty poorly to miss the playoffs. Maybe you can lose out on like a bye if you have the first or second seed gets a bye. Maybe you don't perform as well in the standings at the end. But at the end of the day, if you have 5 or 6 wins, you're probably going to make the playoffs. You'd have to perform very, very poorly to not do that. Because of this, I think your top targets are Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, Nick Chubb, Javonte Williams, and Michael Carter. That is a good mix of studs that we expect to return. Of course, we think maybe shorter term for Barkley and Chubb, a little bit longer term for McCaffrey, although with the Barkley one we don't know as much. But still, studs we expect to return and to be very valuable to close the season, which is what you should be considering most important if you have 0 or 1 losses. And then 2 rookies that I expect to slowly gain value as the season goes along, okay? It is always ideal to use wide receivers when making trades because that is the easiest position to find on free agency, to find players that'll at least get you some points. And so it's also the position that you're likely the deepest at. And so it's always best to be using those in trades. The most likely deal you get done for this is you're going to have to give up a running back. There's no way someone's going to accept, one of these stud running backs for multiple wide receivers. Like, it's pretty unlikely that happens. And so the most likely deal is going to be like a really solid running back 2 with a quality wide receiver. The actual strength of that wide receiver depends on your team. If you have 4 to 5 really strong wide receivers and you can only start 3 of them each week, you can afford to give up a much better wide receiver with your running back and make sure the deal gets done. But if you only have like 3 to 4 good wide receivers, then you might have to try and go in the lower end there. Like, again, it just depends on your specific team. But if you're very deep in wide receiver and you've got quality running backs, pairing one of your like running back 2s with a really solid wide receiver, like a wide receiver 2, a flex option, someone that's like a quality starting piece every week for one of these higher end running backs, That's the direction I would go. And don't be afraid to do 3-for-1 trades, especially if you look on free agency and there's a lot of really good options. Packaging 3 quality players for one of the studs is a direction that I would go, again, even if you're like, but Nick, I don't have McCaffrey, Barkley, Chubb in the short term, right? But if you're 6-0, you can afford to lose a few weeks if you're then gaining a huge edge later on because you've built this lead on everyone else. What about scenario 2? Let's say you're either 4-2, maybe you were 5-1, but like I said, you were getting a little bit lucky in how you got there, or you're 3-3, but you're unlucky to be 3-3. I'm in one league, I'm 3-3, but I have like a 50-point edge in overall points over like the next best person. Like my team is clearly doing really, really well, but I've been very, very unlucky with who I've played. I'd still put a team like that into scenario 2 because one, you're expecting over the long term to not get always unlucky with matchups. So especially with one more game this season, that's going to even out. But then also you own tiebreakers. And so as long as you can, be tied for one of like the last or second to last place in the standings, you're going to be beating people in tiebreakers anyways. And so it's not as much of a concern. Again, for the 3-3 though, in scenario 2, you got to be, probably top 3 in overall points scored. Under this outlook, you're still looking long term, but you need to be more cognizant of the fact that you're not a lock to make the playoffs. No one that's 3-3 right now is a lock to make the playoffs. Even teams that are 4-2 are not a lock to make the playoffs. And so you're still looking long term, like I said, but you're more at risk to get unlucky with matchups, continue getting unlucky. You could have 1 to 2 injuries that hurt your chances. And so you can't afford to take as much risk. And you do need to think a little bit about the short term. Because of that, I think the list for people in scenario 2 is still Nick Chubb, still Javonte Williams, but then also Miles Sanders, Chase Edmonds, Elijah Mitchell, and Zach Moss. As you can see, I've removed McCaffrey and I've removed Barkley just because we have more ambiguity with their injuries. We don't know exactly when they're going to be back, and so I think that you need to avoid risk a little bit more here. And then I've added 4 more like mid to lower end options in Sanders, Edmonds, Mitchell, and Moss. All of them I think have very positive outlooks going forward, but they can also definitely be used in the short term. So they're not as much, hey, I think to close the season they'll be great. They're guys that's like, I think they're undervalued right now, but you can still put them into your lineup and they're not zeros because again, we still need to win right now for 4-2 if we're 3-3. These guys don't necessarily have like a super clear path to running back 1 production, which again is more what we're looking to acquire if we're at 5 or 6 wins right now. But their value is for sure trending up and they can be very helpful in getting us to the playoffs. And these are still guys with upside, right? They're obviously not just like trash players. Scenario 3. Let's say you're 3-3, but you kind of like deserve to be 3-3, right? You're not getting unlucky like the one team I have. Like, you're like medium, middle of the road in points scored. You haven't gotten unlucky with matchups. Or maybe you're 2-4, but with the 2 wins, you're getting unlucky, right? So you think that over time, you should be like a 4-2 team. It's just you're unlucky with the wins right now. In this scenario, you're not off to a great start, right? But it's still very early. By no means are you out of it. I was 2-5 through week 7 and 2-7 through week 9 in one of my leagues last season. I won the final 4 weeks, made it to the playoffs on tiebreaker for points scored because I was getting unlucky with matchups, and I ended up in 2nd place. Again, all you have to do is make the playoffs because then anything can happen in the playoffs, and if you can squeak in with a good team peaking in the playoffs, now we're talking. Now you can win the championship. And if you followed, our content this summer, then it's definitely possible that you've built a team that's going to peak more later in the season because we do typically like young players. Young players more break out later in the year. So if you can just make it, you'll be in good shape under this circumstance. But you got to make the playoffs, right? You still have to get there, okay? Even if you're getting unlucky in points scored, like you're maybe leading league in points scored, but you're 2-4. It's like, yes, you have a strong team, but you got to understand you already got 4 losses, and you still got to make it. Even if you have a good team, you got to make it into the playoffs. And so when we're thinking about trades for these teams, You got to win now. We can't afford to take as much risk saying, oh, I like this player long term. This guy's hurt now, but he'll be great in the future. I'm buying low on him. You still got to be winning now. And so what we want to do is maybe target some players who have good matchups coming up, who are still, we think, going to maybe peak, but they can win now. They can get us wins right now. So the best matchups for running backs at the current time are the Jets, the Lions, the Seahawks, the Dolphins, Chargers, Eagles, Giants, and Falcons. You want your running backs playing those teams. It's a lot of teams that maybe aren't super good right now. So like, obviously the Chargers are good, but the Chargers are like one of the worst run defenses in the NFL. But for a lot of those other teams, they don't have great teams, and so they lose a lot of games. That's positive game scripts their opponents, and then they also have bad run defenses. So the running backs that do not have a bye, this is important. We're in this scenario. We got to win right now. I don't want to be training for running backs as much that have byes coming up because that's not helping me, right? So the running backs who don't have a bye in any of the next 4 weeks and also have really good matchups, who we also think are going to play well, are Chuba Hubbard. He plays the Giants, the Falcons, the Patriots, and the Cardinals. Darrell Williams, we have Clyde on the IR, so we know we're getting good Williams productions in the short term. Titans, Giants, Packers, and Raiders up next. Darrell Henderson, I think he is still a guy that we want to be buying. He's clearly the one, clearly getting a lot of workload, and he's playing the Lions, the Texans, the Titans, and the 49ers up next. We've got Miles Sanders. Really think he kind of took control of that backfield. I know it's been up and down with Miles Sanders, but it seems like now he's taking control of that backfield this last week. He plays the Raiders, the Lions, the Chargers, and the Broncos up next. And then I'll throw Zach Moss still in here because even though he's on bye this next week, if you can survive this week, which is brutal for byes, he's got Dolphins, Jaguars, Jets up next. That's like the best 3-game stretch you can have. And so I know it'd be tough trading for a player than not having him this week, but hopefully, maybe you can afford to just get past this week. I know I have a lot of teams that are just decimated by byes and injuries this week. But, I mean, Dolphins, Jaguars, Jets, that's really, really good post-bye. You got to think he's scoring a lot of touchdowns in those games. But again, in this scenario, I'd shy away from trading for the injured studs just because it's relatively unlikely if you have this many wins that you have a whole lot of depth. And so to trade for stud running backs, you're still going to have quality players. And I know you might have quality players, but you probably don't have enough depth to say, I'm giving up my best players for this running back who's hurt, and I still have enough to produce now. Like, you need wins now. You can't really be affording to do that. And then we look at stud running backs that are healthy. Well, those come at a huge premium. And if you have like 2 wins, do you really have the pieces to be trading for those players? Probably not. So I'd be comfortable trading for everyone that I just mentioned. Obviously, they have different functions. Like Henderson is the high-end target. He'll be elite all season. He's the best long-term option if you're looking for that. Moss would be second best long-term option. He's good by low after last week as well. And then Hubbard and Williams, they're more shorter-term options just because their starters are on IR. But given their matchups, it might be smart to send trade offers. Maybe you're sending like a wide receiver or a tight end depth that you have for these players because maybe the person that has them doesn't really need this short-term production. But again, if you don't have many wins, maybe getting them right now and trying to secure yourself a few wins is the best option. The fourth and final scenario is what I'm going to call the Hail Mary zone. I mean, maybe you're 2-4, but like you're not getting unlucky, right? Like you deserve to be 2-4, you're bottom 25% in points scored, or you have 0 or 1 wins. If you fit any of these categories, you need a Hail Mary, right? You're not getting unlucky, your team's just not very good. And again, you can still make the playoffs. I did it last season when the team has started 2-7, but it's not easy, right? And you kind of need to be taking some level of risk, but it's not the level of risk that's like trade for McCaffrey. If you don't have any wins right now, you're not trading for McCaffrey. You're not getting him for the next few weeks. You're just simply not going to make the playoffs if you're trading for McCaffrey right now. But if you're in this group, you need to acquire players that have a path to league winning upside. Maybe we don't know if it's going to hit, and especially we don't know if it's going to hit in the short term, but they have that path. The problem is we can't just completely avoid floor because if you only have 0, 1, 2 wins and you're avoiding floor, how are you getting more wins if they don't hit? So we need to target players that have some semblance of a floor but have league winning upside if they hit. And my recommendations for players to target under that scenario is Tony Pollard, A.J. Dillon, Javonte Williams, and Jamal Williams. that is probably also the order that I look to acquire them in. Pollard and Dillon are just slam dunk running back ones in any weeks that Zeke or Jones were to miss. Obviously, we don't know if they're going to miss any weeks this season, but these guys at least still have a weekly floor, like some sort of weekly floor when they're not missing. And again, if you have no wins, you got to have a prayer, right? Maybe you trade for Pollard or Dillon, and then one of Zeke or Jones goes down, and you've acquired a running back one for cheap. That's probably something that has to happen for you to make it into the playoffs at this point. And then Javonte Williams, Jamal Williams, they'll be high-end twos, maybe low-end ones, maybe more matchup-based running back ones if Gordon or Swift were to go down. But then these guys still, they do provide some level of value, even in the weeks where the starters are active. But obviously, their path to a ceiling is still going to be needed through injuries. But again, if you find yourself in this spot, you probably don't have the depth to trade for higher-end players, and you can't afford to be trading for these studs that are hurt because you still have to make the playoffs, right? In order to win it all, you have to make the playoffs. And so I think your options are the 4 running backs I just mentioned. So, hope you liked this different setup. If you did, then please hit the like button. It'll give me some sort of indication that you did enjoy it. And let me know if you approve of this style of video. Maybe I'll do it more like this in the future because, again, I really think that's the best way to do it. Trade targets are highly dependent on your team. What's your team look like? What's your outlook on the playoffs? That'll let me know exactly who you should be trading for and what'll give you the best chance of winning a championship. That's what we're trying to do here. So let me know if you liked it. Remember, you can always look at my rest of season rankings as well, come up with your own trade examples. I would really only use the positional rankings as far as that's concerned, since it really depends on your team, your trade partner's team, so many other factors come into play that you can't really look across positions on rest of season rankings chart. But looking by position, try and upgrade, lower end players into higher end players that way. And again, you can find all of that at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. So that'll do it for this one. Hope you all did enjoy. If you did, then how about hitting the like button? And how about subscribing to the channel if you're new here? Thanks for watching.